Hey guys, welcome back to this channel. I'm in the middle of making a photo comparison video between the Sony A7Cii II and the Sony A6700, and I realized I should make this video for your better understanding of the differences between them. There are tons of options when it comes to shooting photos using the Sony A6700. It may be confusing or perhaps overwhelming. This video could be very useful for those who are new to the Sony A6700 or even the Sony ecosystem, or to those who are trying to figure out if or when you should shoot RAW or JPEG photos. To get the best results, we should shoot in the highest quality settings that a camera has to offer. But there are 4 bottlenecks apart from the sensor that may restrict us to always shoot in the highest possible settings in the Sony A6700. Buffer capacity, memory card, editing computer, and software. I will discuss each of them in this video. So which is the setting to choose to get the results as you wish? While the exposure triangle is important to determine the right exposure and the white balance is important to set the color of the image, it is equally important to shoot photos in a particular format to get the maximum out of your camera. Let us understand the various formats and file types that the Sony A6700 has to offer to help us with our photography needs. I have made a cheat sheet for your reference, which you can skip to in the chapter markings down below in the description. Format. You have the option to shoot in 2 primary formats in 3 different modes: RAW, RAW plus non-RAW, and non-RAW options. RAW images have the file extensions called ARW. The RAW format will give you the maximum information from the sensor as seen by the sensor. I will explain more on this in a bit. When it comes to the non-RAW formats, the Sony A6700 allows us to shoot photos in the JPEG and HEIF formats. Since there aren't many devices that support the HEIF files at this point of time of recording this video, I'm going to skip HEIF format in this video, but if you're interested, please let me know in the comments down below. I can make a dedicated video for that. In this video, I will explain the RAW and the JPEG formats available in the Sony A6700. JPEG format essentially is a completely processed, finished and ready to publish or print ready format that will have all the additional processing to the image, like adding picture profiles, lens corrections, etc. in a highly compressed format. It is highly advised against editing any JPEG file as it tends to fall apart easily. At this point, I want to bring your attention to something to keep in your mind throughout the rest of the video. Bigger the file size, more is the information. More compression means more loss of data. Before choosing any of the formats, I would like the viewers to think about what is the publishing platform you're shooting the photos for. If you want a quick turnaround, you can choose to shoot photos in JPEG using your preferred picture profile and share them as soon as you have shot the photos. But if you are planning to edit the photos after shooting them, I highly recommend you to choose the RAW format, as this format stores more information in the file which can later be manipulated. Meaning you have more flexibility while editing and the images will not fall apart as easily as a JPEG does. I personally shoot in RAW plus JPEG format most of the time, as I can use the JPEG images to post in the social media, while I can take my time editing the RAW photos to be uploaded in places like Shutterstock. By the way, our Shutterstock link is in the description down below, and you can purchase our photos you may like from our catalog, which will be indirectly supporting us making more such videos. Here is the table showing how output file sizes are when photos are shot in the RAW and JPEG formats with different file types and aspect ratios. Again, remember, bigger is the file size, more is the stored information. From this table, you can infer that the RAW files offer maximum information that this sensor has to offer. But not all RAW files are made the same. To understand this in a simple way, let us take the RAW format first. Aspect ratio is one of the 2 factors affecting the information collected in the RAW files. Here, the sensor information is ignored as per the aspect ratio. Due to this, there will be a loss of information up to 7.4% depending on the aspect ratio. The allowed aspect ratios in the Sony A6700 are 3:2, 4:3, 16:9 and 1:1. You will have a better chance if you shoot images in the 3:2 aspect ratio and then change it to the desired aspect ratio in the post. This allows for minimal loss during the composition fix. File types is the second factor influencing the information collected in the RAW files. Since the data processed by the 26 megapixel sensor may be too big, the Sony A6700 offers 2 types of compressions for the RAW formats, namely lossless compressed and compressed file types. As per Sony, the lossless compressed RAW is like a zip file with all the data in it, which needs to be unzipped while editing and converting it to JPEGs. This means that your computer will need to use more efforts to edit these files. As this image depicts, Sony has the algorithm to compress the files without any loss in data as well as with minimal loss. We can expect up to 15% loss in data if you were to use the compressed mode. In my opinion, if you are shooting RAW, you're already looking for the best image quality possible out of this sensor, and so you should not be using the compressed mode. There is also a color bit advantage shooting in the lossless compressed mode, which I will explain in a bit. In short, if you want to get the best results out of the RAW, make sure you set the file format to RAW file type to lossless compression, aspect ratio to 3:2. Here's a quick example of editing between the JPEG and RAW files in a contrasty situation. You can pull down the highlights to recover more details from the highlights. You can push up the shadows to get more details from the shadows. You can alter the white balance and hues to change the tone of the image. You could clearly see that you get more bandwidth to edit in RAW images and not so much with the JPEG images. This is the reason why I shoot in both RAW and JPEG most of the time, so that I can shoot pictures like these to upload instantly to my Instagram while I edit pictures like these before I publish them. There are 3 factors or settings that determine the outcome of the JPEG images produced by the Sony A6700 or any other camera for that matter. The same aspect ratios that are available for the RAW format are available for the JPEG format as well. Along with the aspect ratio, file size, image quality of JPEG files determine the final JPEG image that is saved in the memory card. Let me bring up this table for the JPEG images. Point to focus here is that there is a significant quality reduction between the 3:2 aspect ratio and 1:1 aspect ratio. So I highly recommend you to shoot in 3:2 aspect ratio and then to edit in the post to your desired aspect ratio. The difference between the extra fine mode and light is minimal, and depending on where you're publishing your content, you can choose the corresponding quality. For me, if I were to publish on Instagram or Facebook, I would still choose to use extra fine or fine, as cropping and internet compressions would significantly reduce the image size and quality. Between the large, medium and small modes, I see a significant reduction in the resolution, which makes the images pixelated when zoomed in. So I would stick with just the large mode, as I usually crop a bit to fix my composition before posting them. In summary, if you're choosing to shoot in JPEG, you need to set the format to JPEG or RAW plus JPEG, then set the image size to large and choose the quality as you wish. At this point, I want to talk about the capability of the A6700 to shoot the 14-bit RAW images. But you don't get the 14-bit RAW images in every mode. Here's the limitation chart. You do not have the choice to select 12 or 14-bit RAW, and depending on the modes you choose, Sony will decide on the color depth. If you're shooting using the mechanical shutter mode, then in compressed RAW you get 14-bit RAW output in every drive mode except in continuous drive mode, whereas in the lossless compressed RAW mode, which I prefer, you get 14-bit RAW output in every drive mode. In electronic shutter or silent shutter mode, you get 14-bit RAW output in lossless compressed RAW mode, whereas you get only 12-bit output in compressed RAW mode. This is more of the reason why you shouldn't ever shoot in the compressed RAW mode. Please note that all of the JPEG modes will only give you 8-bit output. If you need 14 or 12-bit output, you need to use RAW modes. On the topic of drive modes, even if the A6700 can shoot 11 frames per second at high plus mode, there are limitations to achieve this. More the computation, slower the frames per second the camera can shoot. For example, if you need to meter the light in auto exposure metering in auto ISO settings, calculating the appropriate white balance in auto white balance mode, and nailing the autofocus points in the continuous autofocus mode, it is going to affect how many frames per second it can shoot in the continuous drive mode. So if you can set the ISO and white balance beforehand and just let the camera focus on continuous autofocus calculations, there's a chance of getting the highest frames per second possible. Again, if the subject is erratic, then you only get lower frames per second, as the camera takes some time to make sure that focus is nailed in the focus priority shots. Here is a table for how many frames can be shot before filling up the buffer. This will most likely reduce if you were to shoot in various different modes as explained earlier. Then you will need to wait for the buffer to clear until you shoot your next set of frames, which will be lower than the previous set of frames. So I highly recommend you to shoot at high and not high plus, and also to be more conservative on spraying and praying. If you're shooting something relatively stationary where people are posing, then you should better use the low drive mode, which should be sufficient without wasting any frames. In summary, for wildlife and even photography with few auto settings like auto ISO, auto white balance, or even with continuous autofocus, I recommend high drive mode. For casual photos, portraits, you should be good with low drive mode. And for landscapes, you should choose single shot drive mode. To understand which memory card to use, you should know the buffer limitations as seen earlier. It takes quite a bit of time to clear even with the V90 memory cards with 260 megabits per second write speeds. Here is a sample chart on total amount of photos that can be stored in different card sizes shooting in different formats as discussed earlier. Since I will not be shooting in either compressed RAW format or any JPEG format other than large, this chart was made only for the combinations that I would shoot. Since there is a large difference between the sizes of the extra fine and fine qualities and not so much difference between the fine and the standard qualities, I will stick with the fine and not the extra fine or standard qualities, thereby giving me enough photos to fill up my memory card with the limited space of 128GB card. Why 128GB card? Because V90 cards are damn expensive and people who are looking into buying the Sony A6700 may not have the budget to buy a 512GB V90 card. Why V90 card, you may ask? Firstly, if you shoot JPEG fine images, you will never run out of the buffer. But if you were to shoot RAW in high drive, the buffer will fill up very fast as we saw earlier and need to clear them. Here is a chart of clearing rate when the buffer is filled up in RAW or RAW plus JPEG modes. It takes 2 to 4 seconds to clear the buffer if V90 card was used, and the more you shoot, the longer it will take to clear the buffer. If you were to use V60 or V30 cards, it is of course going to take longer to clear the buffer and you will not get the maximum out of the camera. V60 cards might take up to 8 to 9 seconds and V30 cards can take up to 9 to 10 seconds to clear the buffer. That's why choosing the right card will get you better output for the different drive modes you may use. Editing software and hardware are also important to consider as bigger and more compressed files may take longer time to be processed. I do not use Lightroom anymore, but if you were to use Lightroom, you will be stressing the hardware a lot, but I use Darkroom and it is working sufficiently well. Before ending the video, I will summarize everything again. Set the format you want to shoot, RAW or JPEG or RAW plus JPEG. Set the corresponding settings. If you are shooting RAW, you should set the corresponding RAW file type and aspect ratio. If you're shooting JPEG, you should consider JPEG quality, JPEG size, and aspect ratio. Then the drive modes depending on what you plan to shoot. You can choose either single shot or continuous low or continuous high for different situations. Set the autofocus, white balance, and exposure, and you are set to go. Yeah, of course I shoot manual. If you want to know more about it, let me know in the comments down below. I will make a video for that as well. For now, I think you either got enough information or got too confused. Thank you for watching the video. Hope you have a wonderful day. Peace.